Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this meeting tonight. This is our Vision Committee meeting, and it is March 23rd, 2022. Our mayor is doing some spring break type activities, I believe, and so I'm chairing this evening. And could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Dennehy?
Here.
Councilmember Reed? Absent. Councilmember Schmisher?
Here.
Councilmember B. Smith?
Here.
Councilmember Stein?
Here.
Councilmember Tracy? Absent. Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick?
Here. Thank you for that. Tonight, we're going to be talking about trail usage, and so I'll just turn it over to you, Ryan, and take us away here.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick. Tonight we'll be discussing trail usage and in particular the events and carrying capacity of our trail system and discussions around policy and what the future of hosting events out there should look like. And for now, I'm going to pass it down to Rex Brady to talk about the trail system and what it means to be a land manager and all those fun things.
Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, council. How's everybody tonight? Good. The reason we're here is to talk about our fantastic trail system. Thanks to everybody that's up on Diocese there, and Steve Thomas, our trail builder. We've created an incredible trail system in the Royal Gorge Park. So incredible that it is attracting attention from all over the country. I guess my main concern here is we've created this, and now we have to protect it. We have to determine a few things, as far as special events that are happening in the park, what the carrying capacity of the park is, how many participants in any one event is too many, and so on and so forth. How many events per year we can hold, and how many would be too many. We have Brian Ledoux is here with us tonight from FAR. He's got some opinions as well as Steve. But what we wanted to talk about is basically, how we are going to manage this trail system and be good stewards of the land and still attract visitors here and have these events and do it responsibly. That's my main concern. So we can just start talking about carrying capacity, what we believe the Royal Gorge Trail System at this point, what that carrying capacity is. Last year in the ZIA event, we had over 300 participants. Steve Thomas actually, and did you ride that event, Brian?
I did, ZIA, yes.
Brian didn't, I don't think so. Oh. But, so I'll let Steve talk about the event itself and the level of 300, I think it was just over 300, 312 or something like that. But I can have Steve talk about how he felt about the numbers that we had there and how that affected the trail system and even the campground and the camping that I allowed outside of the campground, just car camping. So Steve, if you would talk about that a little.
Yes, the ZIA ride was a great event. I thought it went really well, and we had a wonderful time. And the ZIA folks have a wonderful reputation, too. No matter where they have their events, they clean up after themselves. They're very respectful to the locals and the land. And honestly, the conditions were ideal for it. Having that traffic is not bad for the trails when the conditions are ideal. The only thing that we saw after the event were a few rocks kicked loose here and there, but it was minor compared to the amount of folks that were out there, which Rex said 300 plus. This year, I think they're saying 350.
Right. At this point, he's at 300 and still climbing. So.
Right.
Probably this year for the ZIA event, whatever he ends up with, if it's 400, we could try that to see and just compare last year with this year, how that extra 100 people impacted the trail system. And that's what we're trying to come up with is that balance, okay, how many is too many? So according to Steve, it went really well with the 300 participants. Does that mean we should have 400? I don't know that answer to that question at this point. It's something, this is going to be fluid. It's going to be something that just keeps developing over the years. But I think we need to set, some parameters for at least the number of participants per event. We need to probably think about how many events that we can hold. And we need to really think about our locals. FAR, we have Star Point here today that have events in those parks as well. So we want to find that balance, and I believe our local FAR and Star Point that use that trail, honestly, I think they should come first, because FAR has been obviously instrumental in this entire trail system and the entire concept of trails. After the Royal Gorge fire, there wasn't much left to do other than had the thought of, we can build trails now. So that's what we did. But, we may even want to, at some point, maybe put a committee or subcommittee together to kind of hash out what we think will work and actually have a policy in place to where an event organizer comes to us and we can say, okay, here is the City of Canyon City's policy on events. Each step has to be followed. If you can do that, we'll consider you. And, with these, we have an event coming up in April 9th and 10th with Aravaipa. It's their first time here. And like Steve said, and I've noticed, after Zia leaves, you can't even tell that they were there. They do everything right. They're a great organization. And I think it obviously behooves any event organizer to be the same way. Because obviously, if they come in and tear our trails up, we're not going to invite them back. So hopefully every event organizer does a great job like Zia does. So that's what we're looking for. And, limiting the capacity on these events, I think, is a really good idea. And I think what will happen if we limit, the number of participants is this event will become exclusive. It'll be something everybody wants to do. They'll, if Seth Bush from Zia says, hey, we're limited to 350 riders. And so that 350 riders it's going to be an exclusive event for them. And that's what I want to try to keep in mind as we move forward through this whole entire process is, and I mentioned this before, last time I sat before you, but we don't want to love this thing to death. And we've got an incredible trail system, and it's up to us to keep it that way.
Council? Yes, Amy.
I definitely want to hear from Steve and from Brian and from Kim and Mary as well if they'd like, but just a couple of initial reactions. I think that makes perfect sense, like thinking about how many people is appropriate for a cap and how many events per year is appropriate for a cap to make sure that we aren't loving it to death, but also to make sure that it's still accessible for locals and you can still just go up there on a Saturday afternoon and go for a run or go for a ride, and not always having to be worried about events. And also making sure that there isn't so much competition from larger outside organizations that maybe have more money for marketing and can put on a little bit splashier of events that then take away from some of the local nonprofit fundraising. That's really important as well. I love the idea of putting together a policy and maybe a subcommittee to look at things. One idea that is not mine, but perhaps we could also have a deadline, and just if you're interested in having an event and you're not one of the established local nonprofits, you have to submit it by X time, and then we review them all at the same time. And if we want to have 4 non-local events at the Gorge a year on the trails, then you can review everybody and it's apples to apples, and you can look at past performance, like how did they leave the trails, or you can look at, is it a new organization that's bringing something really exciting and a lot of energy, and maybe having that committee have some of the great folks who are at the table or members of your organizations to make sure that we're getting all of those perspectives.
Yeah, and I agree. And if that happens early enough in the year, or even late the prior year, so at least we'll have an idea of where we're going to go with this, and we can kind of, in my opinion, we'll be able to cherry pick the people that we want to come in here. And those that have already proven themselves, you know, as event organizers, Zia is one. We'll see how Aravaipa does, but they're coming, and they will have more and more event organizers wanting to use our trail systems.
Just the one other initial comment that I had, and again, really want to hear from everybody else as well, but I do wonder if there should be different carrying capacities if it's a bike ride versus a run, and certainly if it's roads versus trails. I think the Rim to Rim has had close to 500 in the past without an issue, but that's been on roads, and I know that they're planning to limit the trail race to 100 or 150 this
Right.
year. So just, I think that conversation, like, doesn't matter what the modality is. I don't know if there's a bigger, I'm sure Brian and Steve know if there's and you, Rex, know if there's a bigger impact to trails if it's a different type of event. So that, and then also if there's, I don't know, I would be interested to know about the parking situation, because I think sometimes, like Boo at the Bridge, that can get a little dicey when you have too many cars up there. So.
And we do have one location in mind. I know parking is an issue. If you're familiar with County Road 3A, you're going up to the gorge, you get to the top before you take that big right-hand corner to go to the bridge itself. There's an area that had, at one point, had 2 shelters in it and a restroom that burned in the fire. It's just kind of a plateaued top area there, which would make, we could get a lot of parking in that. And that's something it probably should be used for, to take the pressure off of everything else, and can be easily linked into the trail system as well. Right now, we'd have to build trail a little bit, you know, from that parking area, the proposed parking area, to link into the trail system itself, but not a heck of a lot. But parking can be an issue.
Any other questions from council?
I just have a quick question. Like, these groups like Zia, aren't most of these pretty environmental friendly? Like, they really take care of the environment around them, and they don't really want a reputation for not cleaning up after themselves? Isn't that pretty
Oh, absolutely.
straightforward? Okay. So that's not super huge concern?
No, not at this point with the organizers that we've had so far. It's not a concern.
That's really all I have.
Andrea had a question.
I was wondering, is there some way that we've been tracking how many people overall use our trails? Do we ever have like maybe a Saturday when a volunteer can kind of stand at the trailhead and figure it out?
We never have.
We haven't. They do have trail counters that the BLM Forest Service, they use those. So any popular trail, you could set that just temporarily across the trail, and it counts every person that goes through.
So, because I noticed, I did a search online yesterday, and all of the references to our trails have thousands of comments. So I just wondered if we had a handle on, you know, and besides these special events, how much usage they're getting.
I think what I've found is if you, people that are coming to the bridge, they tend to stop at the main trailhead, and that first section of the rim trail sees a great deal of use. And I would say that sees more use than any other section of trail. I don't know if Made in the Shade is also a busy trail, but I think there's enough trail out there that for those that want to get out, there's plenty of trail that's not so overpopulated.
Right, but some do get more usage.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Tim, did you have a question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think so far, the events that have been held up there, I've been a part of some of those as a working participant, but, and I know the FAR that they do up at Royal Gorge, up at Ty's place. That's a very clean, everything's picked up. I think that's one thing that we gotta remember is these groups overall are environmentally, sound groups. They know the consequences and that. And I agree with you absolutely, Rex, that, I think the numbers do gotta be limited. And then monitor it if it looks like we can handle 50 more or maybe another 50 more,
Right.
Bring it up to that point because it is a fantastic trail system. And I just got a quick question. Brian, the one in the Fardes, up at Royal Gorge, up at Ty's Place, that goes on both is that strictly on Ty's, or does that goes on the park as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely use the city park side of it. Ty's property is actually a fairly small part of it.
Right, okay.
But yeah, finish line is staged on Ty's side at
Okay.
Gunslingers.
And, I mean, on that one's, I mean, numbers have never been exorbitant on that one, I know that, but, that's another one that, it's a great deal, and how they run it is fantastic, I can tell you that, and I don't know, and I guess we'll hear from you on what you think the trail system and that, and see what you think on it.
Yeah, I guess last year's Zia Ride, I didn't race it, but I camped there and provided support for my wife. But, as a sort of a nerdy type person, it's a 6 and 12-hour ride for 300 people. I actually went through the finishing results and tallied up the number of laps, and it was something like 15 or 1800 person laps on that 10-mile system. And I specifically rode that system, or the actual race course Sunday morning, following the race. And you could tell it had an event, but it was in great shape, all things, 1,800 people, considered. So I think that's a reasonable place to start. The Ervapia event will be interesting to watch. That'll be the first running race. So it will be interesting to see what, specifically on trails, and they have 10K lap. And I believe, I don't know which is Saturday, which is Sunday, but if I'm around, I'll definitely take a look at those trails and see how they deal with it. The interesting thing, I think, is the Zia Ride was mid-May last year as well. 2 days later, it rained like a half of an inch. Had that storm system come in Friday afternoon as opposed to Wednesday, we would have had an issue. And I think that the ability, and it's got to be super frustrating, and it is for event, I know FAR struggles with it, but having an event shut down because of poor trail conditions is stressful, but it is something that needs to be able to happen. We don't need to leave that up to the event organizer themselves. I mean, they're looking at a fair amount of money on the table, and they're here and they're then sort of gone, and we're left with the pieces. So I think keeping that ability within the city and within people like FAR, that is super helpful, because that is a very difficult decision to make, especially when it's being made within 24 hours an event. I don't envy those positions, but it does need to happen.
And that is one change that we just made to the standard contract, to take that so that it is something that is decided by the people who are the most interested in the trails, as opposed to the people who may have other considerations on the line. So glad to hear that is a really helpful change to have been made. And definitely one that we should keep going forward as well.
Right, and I think, to the point of they have a vested interest as well. If they want to come back, they want to behave well. I mean, that's a given. But again, it's watching a weather forecast, 24, 12 hours out is tough. And I think the other thing to consider is the camping with the Zia Ride and presumably the Ervapia event. That's a really neat feature. I mean, you do get a lot of people into, the campground. It's not necessarily a party vibe, but a bunch of people, like-minded people who are there for a fun event. It's fun to see that kind of density, as long as it's taken care of. But I think, vehicles in those meadows, if they're anything wet, doesn't work. So that same decision, it's not just the trails, it's the auxiliary stuff, the vehicles off of the maintained roads. If it's wet, that's a problem. When it's dry, like last year, it worked great, worked perfect. This year, these two events are basically a month apart, both in the spring. So it does feel like it's sort of stacking up. But that's, spring and fall is the prime time for events. There's the Revenant Running, I believe, is set for like November. That starts to push in, off the shoulder season, so it's less of an issue. Hot summer months, nobody's going to put on an event, kind of thing. So that density is for consideration as well.
So I've got a couple of questions and maybe some comments. What is the difference between our trails and trails in the national parks? I mean, those park trails see heavy usage. So what's the difference? I mean, is there something special about our trails that they wear out quicker? What is the problem we're talking about?
Well, the soil here is not great. I mean, it does move because it gets so dry for potentially months on end, and then we have these big rain events. It definitely moves soil. One thing with the Park Service is they have the money and the personnel to be out there constantly maintaining the trails, and they have big crews that can do that, as where we currently do not have that.
So it's not necessarily usage of the trail that's the problem. It's usage of the trail during certain moisture conditions,
Yes.
essentially, in the trail. Well, so that leads me to my next concern, which is, shouldn't those who cause the cost bear the cost? And so if we have an event that someone wants to have 800 riders on a trail, if it's dry, what I'm hearing is it doesn't sound like it's much of a problem. If it's wet, there can be substantial damage. And so shouldn't our contracts be cognizant of that fact, and then that we have a way so that we can get the appropriate maintenance on the trails after heavy usage during a moisture event, for repair. I mean, to recover money for repairs. So shouldn't that be the case, that those who cause the cost should bear the cost?
And before they answer that question, one concern that I have hearing that is not only the carrying capacity of the trail system, but as was mentioned earlier, the logistics of parking. When you're talking 800 attendees, and then as Brian mentioned, there's also support people that are up there. You have to have quite a few people up there in order to support an event that large. And I think from a logistical standpoint, you start running into issues where parking becomes an issue. You have to bring up additional bathrooms or whatever the case might be. So there's more than just trail damage when we're talking about capping the number of people.
So, and I understand that. I understand that parking is going to be an issue. We have
Sure.
issue with parking downtown.
Everywhere, yep.
So it's not a new or unique issue for us here, but I certainly recognize that. But nonetheless, really where I'm coming from is I have a problem with special rules for special people. I have a problem with that. These are public trails. They should be available to the public, and that includes non-residents as well as residents. We don't check residency IDs when people come into town. And so I'm concerned about that aspect of it. That's a big concern for me. And what I would, what I hopefully we can get to is we need to address parking problems. We need to address numbers of people problems, bathrooms and things like that, trash cans, all those kinds of things. Those do need to factor into our, deliberations on this. But it seems to me that if we're worried about trail damage, then we don't have the right system in place yet to mitigate that damage. I mean, where we don't want to be is the city bearing the brunt for, somebody goes out there in the mud and literally destroys the trail. We don't want that. I mean, we want to preserve what we've got. Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem, just a couple of quick thoughts, and the folks at the table are obviously the experts, so please stop me when I get things wrong, and please amplify when I get them right, hopefully. But just a couple of really quick thoughts. One, I think that the conversation isn't so much about limiting access to the trails to residents. It's when you have these large-scale events, it actually closes the trails so people can't access them. So, we've got some really long-standing events that are in our community that I think benefit our community greatly, and we have a lot of new folks who are coming in and who want to make money off of our trails, which is great to a certain extent. That's part of the reason why they were built, so we could have really fun things to do on them. like
And we
Zia
want to
rides.
make money off of them.
For sure. For sure, but only to a certain point. Like, we don't want the trails to be shut down so often that we here in Canyon, and also other people who are coming here to enjoy them, can't enjoy them because there's always an event going on. So I did just want to say that. And then just two other really quick thoughts about people causing the damage being the ones to bear the cost. Absolutely. So in the contract for these types of events, there's a liability clause, so they have to put down a security deposit. And there's also a clause that says that if you cause more damage than what the security deposit is, you're responsible for that as well. But, and again, correct me when I get things wrong, but my impression is that, there's only so much you can actually do to repair the damage, which is why it's so important that we have that clause that it's the city's decision whether or not the event can go on if the trail conditions don't allow it to happen. So I did just want to say that. And then my other really quick thought was just on, I feel like it's not just the event, that it's also this ongoing maintenance issue. And we have an absolutely fantastic Parks Department and trail builder, but we don't actually have ongoing maintenance of all of the trails that we've built on a really regular basis like we have in the national parks. So part of the conversation that I hope that we can have tonight is that 5%. So is the money that we're gonna make off of some of these events, how do we make sure that it's going back into the maintenance of our trail system? How do we make sure that it's going back into our parks and our outdoor recreation?
Exactly. Kim, did you have something to?
I do. Kim Swearingen, Public Works Director. I'm here as a representative in support of Rex in regards to what it comes to when we're talking about what Amy just mentioned, when we're talking about maintenance and from a city perspective. And something that we talked about this morning was the fact that we have to think of this as an asset. It's an asset to the city, regardless of the fact that it's a parks asset. It's the same as a water line, it's the same as a road, it's the same as any of those other assets that we have within the city that we're trying to maintain. So even though the character of it has changed, it's, bicycle riders and it's recreation and those kinds of things, we still have to keep that in mind, that it's like a pipeline. We're gonna have to maintain that pipeline, we're gonna have to maintain the flow. Regardless of the fact that we may have like 20 hotels here to support all the people that come here, we still have to make sure it's good for residents. So those are the kinds of balances that we need to make sure we have. Even though it is a park system, a park trail system, it is still a city asset. So like Amy said, we have to maintain it. We know that our Parks Department is strained as it is already. So what this is trying to do is trying to quantify that maintenance that we're trying to maintain. We're trying to maintain these parks. We know that we have limited staff, we know that we have limited money, so we know that when these giant events come through, that we're gonna be able to bring it back, and we're gonna be able to have it for the folks that are here every day. We don't want to have to go back to Airvapa or Zia or any of these folks and say, hey, you caused massive amounts of damage on a trail, you need to come fix it. Our trail is closed for the next 2 to 3 months while we repair it, and then we don't have the enjoyment of it. So that's, we're just trying to be a little bit proactive in making sure that, first of all, we're taking care of the asset that we've been asked to maintain, as well as the potential for more of those things, having more trails, having more events come here. And so we've also talked about, briefly, the committee that we talked about. We talked about getting together with all of the entities. So we're talking about BLM, we're talking about the county, we're talking about us, all those people that are basically affected by these large events. And we were talking about having a kind of a permanent committee where we would meet either in January or December of the prior year, talking about the whole big picture. What's going to be the calendar? How many folks are we going to have on our trails? How many events are we going to allow, et cetera? So that it's not just about us, because it affects the county, it affects BLM. So we were talking about that this morning, kind of establishing that committee. So it's not just us in Canyon, it's everybody, so that we're all on the same page.
Does Emily have her hand up? Is that what I see there? No. Okay.
I think an interesting point to note is that there's a reason that event organizers come to the city. The permitting is relatively easy. The permitting for the BLM is not. And that's, you know, the trail system's great and the permitting's noticeably easier, so of course they come to the city. You know,
What,
they're,
what's more difficult about the BLM system, permitting?
I think it's a length and a cost. And there is a per person or minimum cost that they take. But it's just the paperwork and the time frame, you know, Aravapia showing up, you know, whatever, 8 weeks before an event, that doesn't happen on the BLM side.
Gotcha. And I think that, you know, being flexible is important for us too. You know, I don't think that we want to get to where it takes 12 months to get a permit, you know?
Right, and that's key. And I do think it's, you know, at some point, I mean, we want to prevent the damage in the first place, because quickly it becomes something that you know, no matter how much money you throw at it, you're not actually going to fix. I mean, that's, I think you know, $3,600 or something for Aravapia. I mean, it's a week of Steve, right? I mean, if there's legitimate damage, that's not gonna cover it. And it's just something you can't throw enough money at it. You know, you might as well just let it age back the way it was. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to rebuild, or incredibly expensive at least, to rebuild a trail. You know, it's just not something that's going to happen from a, hey, you caused damage, give us some money to fix it. Like, that's just not.
So are we mainly talking about rutting? Is that the main kind of damage we're talking about? What kind of damage are we talking about? I mean, it seems to me we built the trail, and this is, you know, if I'm ignorant up here, please excuse my ignorance, but I'm asking for clarification. But so what is the damage that you know, it's hard for me to envision
Right.
damage that
Generally-
can't be repaired by the same means that we built the trail with in the first place.
True, but that's, I mean, and generally speaking, there is no damage. I mean, wet, muddy conditions, you know, there can definitely be damage, particularly if you're on a, shall we say, rather large animal. But, you know, we've addressed that issue. Yeah, you could basically send the machine back through and rebuild it, but that's, I mean, the other option is you just let the natural use and natural weathering processes take 6 months to deal with it. And that's the thing. We don't want to deal with, you know, the regular users having to basically smooth it back in all the time. And that's, you know, we're dealing with that in South Canyon now after some muddy usage in February. It's obnoxious. Yeah, in a few months it'll basically go away. But we would have never spent, even if somebody said, I'll pay you for the damage, you know, it's, you know, money and reality just don't line up on that kind of thing. I mean, you could send the machine back through, but it's just not wise use of money. The other side of it is, I mean, we've had trails in the gorge now for several years. You know, maintenance has been limited to raking rocks off. I mean, and that's not even really a maintenance. It's just it makes it slightly more enjoyable for the users. And there's very limited things that need, you know, Steve's expertise or financial, you know, major financial maintenance to have happened. And that's the beauty of a well-built natural surface single track trail is, you know, maintenance is sort of easy. You know, you talk about the national parks, and I think, you know, those get so much use, you know, so crowded. You know, a lot of their trails basically come into 10-foot wide, you know, giant paths,
Right.
whereas we want 12-inch wide single track trail. And it'll stay that way depending on use. You know, race course, everybody's going the same direction. Day-to-day use, you know, you're not generally going to widen out a trail like that. So.
And I just might add a little to that. We do have in our contract a damage deposit. All these event organizers are insured. So, you know, anything that happens beyond their $3,000 damage deposit, you know, would be picked up potentially by their insurance. But the thing is with the trails, and what I think you're trying to get at, is the damage that's done normally is only done when the conditions are not optimal. And we also wrote a blurb in this contract that the city has the right to say, you know, I'm sorry, but the trails are not usable right now, you're going to have to postpone or cancel your event. So we have that option. But, you know, when somebody goes through and we haven't even talked about the Royal Cascade, that's kind of a different animal in itself, but, you know, if people ride through a muddy trail or walk through a muddy trail, you have footprints and you have tire tracks. Those eventually, when the trail conditions are right, will naturally go away just through use. So, you know, major damage to a single track trail is pretty rare. I think if you guys agree with that, but it still requires that maintenance. I mean, every time there's a footprint or a tire track, we don't need to go out there and rake it out and smooth it out. It's something that needs to be done on a consistent basis. You know, we take a section, 5-mile section of trail, and we go through and straighten it up and rake it and do what we can for the maintenance of it, and that's usually the end of it. But where we get in trouble is using muddy trails or trails that are not in optimum condition. So that's the thing, in my mind anyway, that we really need to avoid, and we have a mechanism in place to avoid that. So, but, you know, we have a lot of damage that's done by locals who, you know, I drove up here, it's a beautiful day, and I'm going for a hike. I don't care if it's muddy. Steve was telling me the other day, going up Royal Cascade, that it was just duck walking in the mud, and they just kept going and going and going. And, you know, how fun could that have been, just slipping and sliding? So I think, you know, there's a education component that we really need to get out into the public and into our community and those that come here. I mean, you have to take care of that trail, and you have to be wise enough and smart enough to say, I'm not going to walk today, I'll come back tomorrow or the next day, you know, when the trail is optimal. So I think there's an education component, and FAR's done a great job with that, but I think we need to expand on that and in educating trail users. And, you know, signage is great, but people normally walk around a sign and don't read it. So, you know, if we get it out on social media, which we have, and just try to educate the, you know, your day-to-day trail user and say, hey, you know, stay off of it. It's for your own good. I mean, it's no fun slipping around, sliding around in the mud, and it damages the trail. So I think education is something we really need to concentrate on as well as we move forward.
You had another comment, Demi?
Just a follow-up question for Mr. Ledoux. I think I heard you say that the BLM process is not only more complicated, they also charge people more than the city does. And I was wondering if there is kind of an industry standard. I think we take 5% of the general, or of the registration fees. And I'm wondering if we are charging too little, or if that is kind of what the industry standard is and the BLM is just charging more.
And I'd have to do more research on the BLM side of it, but I think it's also, you know, a capacity issue with staffing, you know, so it's not as though they're looking at it from a market rate kind of aspect. It's just, you know, we don't, maybe necessarily don't want to deal with the, you know, an event kind of thing. You know, it's, yeah, you can put a permit in, it goes to the back of the line, maybe we'll get to it kind of thing. Whereas, you know, that line of stuff for the city is shorter, kind of thing, so.
Thank you.
A thought occurs to me that if you know, let me preface this by saying for about 6 years, I was responsible for inspecting an earth-filled dam daily. And that meant that, you know, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. I had people that took over the inspections on weekends for me. Nonetheless, they had to be made under any weather conditions. And if you're out there driving on the top of that earth-filled dam after snow or rain, you were putting big ruts out there. And it was pretty much independent of how many, you know, after a couple of vehicles, it didn't matter how many more went out there, you still had the ruts. that had to be dealt with. And you got to there was a certain moisture content that when you were transitioning from mud to dry, that if you got out there in your vehicle, you could actually drive the ruts down and compress them back so that you were on a relatively flat surface. But have we thought about restricting usage of the trails when they're too muddy?
Well, it is signed in all the trail systems now that if you stop and pay attention to the signs, it says do not use during muddy conditions.
But
And
that's a personal,
Exactly.
yeah.
exactly.
We don't have we don't have a trail Nazi out there.
It's
to-
an
No, no.
honor system for sure.
The honor system.
It is.
It gets tough, you know, the Eagle Wing Trailhead has a gate, and we've talked with the rec district about, hey, do we want to close the gate for muddy conditions? What happens is you get into that issue of, so you open the gate, and so people say, oh, then it's fine, even though it's not, it's a logistical issue, staffing issue. The current approach, and I think it works well for Canyon City so far, is the honor system. We've done some other things that definitely helps, but closing gates and trying to close natural surface trail, there's so many access points that it becomes not all that feasible. I think the education approach is probably the best way to go.
Right. Understand.
Yeah, one thought I had for maybe sooner than later, working in the Philadelphia park system, they too have signage on all the parks, all the trails, but they took it a step further and actually had an ambassador program. And anyone could sign up for it. It was a volunteer thing, and the folks would get perks of different kinds. But they were just out there to stop people and educate them, and whether the weather's nice or not nice, you can have people just, if they are willing to take the time and listen, you can learn a lot if you're not paying attention to the signs themselves.
And of course, the other challenge that we have is it's not all wet and muddy and all dry. That
Exactly.
we've got everything everywhere, almost at
And
any
that's
time,
difficult. Right.
depending on where you are on the north side or whatever.
Right.
Right, and that's just striking that balance. I mean, trails thaw out at different rates, according to canopy cover and exposure and all that. So, I mean, you can have a 85% dry trail, and the other percentage is still maybe questionable. So it's something that you need to consider. But what we're gonna do, and Steve has the Rokon, it's a two-wheel drive motorcycle that we bought for his use to get back and forth to his building sites. But before these events, the day before, possibly 2 days before, Steve will ride the course. And he'll evaluate the condition of the course at that time. So at least we have something to, after the event, we'll go ride it again, and we compare, 2 days before the event and 2 days after. So we can see where those problem areas are, and maybe there's something we can do to mitigate those problem areas if we do come across them, so.
And I would suggest that if we intend to hold people contractually liable for damage, that you get a GoPro,
Yes.
and video the whole trail as you take that, as you go around to evaluate the conditions in the trail. That way, because, it's a little bit hard if you get into the he said, she said type situation. But if you have a GoPro video of what the trail looked like before.
And normally the event organizers come in several days in advance, so that's something they could do together.
Sure.
Is, okay, we've seen the trail, and we've seen the course, and we both are in agreement, and then after, we'll do the same thing, so.
Yeah, and they've offered to do so
Yeah.
as well, the Zia folks and also the Aerovape people. We'll get their name down eventually. But they too have offered not only to come potentially prior to the event and help us out, but also have a few folks on hand after the event.
Yeah.
And since they're doing events all over the West, it behooves them to do so.
I just,
Just one more
No, go
question, and then, so the events we're talking about are generally a multi-day event, is that correct? Like 2 days?
2 days.
2 days
Well,
that the trail may be closed?
The Zia ride is 1 day,
1 day?
yes, but I think the new event will be a 2-day,
Okay,
yes.
okay. So to me, that would be from where I sit and not having ever maintained a trail, that would be the better metric is, the number of trail days that we have for events versus trail days for citizens. Because if we lose the use of trails 1 day, once a month, is that too much? So those are the kind of questions that we need to be
And for
looking
the
at.
events, anyway, at least up to this point, it's all been in the Royal Gorge Park. The Royal Gorge Park trails aren't the only trails in Fremont County. There's many, many, many miles of trail in Fremont County that people, okay, we can't hike the gorge today, so we'll go to South Canyon, or we'll go out to Oil Well, or we'll go somewhere else. But there's options. I mean, it's not like we're depriving them of their ability to use a trail when there's an event in progress.
But I think
It's just that particular trail.
by the same token, we could also be encouraging events to look at Oil Well Flats, look at some of our other trail systems, see why wouldn't you want to have an event there and kind of get people more excited about some of the other systems as well. And the only comment I would have, John, is that it's also typically a weekend, and that's typically
Correct.
when most people are able to get out on the trail, so it's not necessarily a
Understand.
1-for-1. I think you have to look at it as
That's true also. Yeah,
I just wanted to piggyback off of the education portion. Safety, I'm guessing it's gonna be a little more dangerous when the conditions are not optimal. Is that true, false?
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of trails and outdoor rec, but I never go. I always defer to something with a ball. But even with baseball, I hear things like, in my day, we played in the rain. Well, now they don't let you do that because you tear the field up because of the moisture, and the potential for injury is always higher. So I would just like to see some safety stuff in there as well on the education portion.
Yeah, well, as a novice mountain biker, I wouldn't ride in the mud just because the potential is there to slip out and
crash and burn is, I
hurt
think.
myself.
Right. And I just wanted to say that the Royal Gorge system actually doesn't seem to take a toll as South Canyon does. South Canyon, the soil is different there. It becomes very slippery, and there's far more issues there. And also with erosion in South Canyon, it's a bigger issue, so.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, we were talking about doing a pre-ride, and and I'm going to get back to you with the mud on you, but the pre-ride is that, can we put together something that, that you guys sign as an agreement that says, hey, this is what the trails were like? That way you're not going to get the, hey, no, they're not. Is that something that we should look at? I think it's great, and I do believe that everybody goes and rides it beforehand. But then if it comes back afterwards, hey, this was messed up already. No, it wasn't. You get I think it's just another step that we could say, hey, let's just sign an agreement. If you see any parts on it, we'll write this on it. Let's sign it, go on to the next. I think that would be get a pre-signing on the trails. I think that would be
I think that's a good idea.
That's a good idea, and it's easy enough to do. And when they're marking the course, the event organizer has to travel the entire course to mark it, so they're already going to be doing that. And if we just, either Steve or myself or somebody else that goes with them, then sure, we can come to an agreement. This is the condition of the trail. There's a spot here that is a concern, and we'll look at it after the event. Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and it's.
That way you're not saying, hey, this wasn't like this,
Right,
and,
sure.
I think it just covers it a little bit better on both ends, so. And then, one time when you do go riding in the mud, can you just take some pictures, please? Ask your wife or swing by the house. I'd like to see this.
In the
okay?
ambulance on the way to the hospital.
Perfect.
Amy?
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. I did just want to acknowledge that we also have the Rim to Rim race planning director in the audience. I wasn't sure if you wanted to say a few words about the Rim to Rim, or about being a nonprofit, local nonprofit using the trails, and your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, thank you for letting me speak. So I work for StarPoint, and I think everybody should be familiar with StarPoint. We're a nonprofit organization. We've served our community for 45 years. So we serve a lot of families and individuals in our community, primarily working with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I work for StarPoint, and I'm also in the foundation department. So my job is to raise funds, additional funds, to supplement the programs of StarPoint. In that, my role is a race director for the Rim to Rim Royal Gorge races. This year will be our 12th event. The race means a lot to us. I know that we don't want to pick and choose. It's hard to think about those options. We want everybody to use the land. But I do, when we're weighing out that balance, I really want us to take consideration of the people that do serve the community. This race means a lot to the people that we work with, the people that we serve. It means the world to me. So each year when we plan this, we're very thoughtful, and how can we grow this and make this different so that people will still come. And as Rex said, you know, these other groups, they're coming, and that always causes alarm to us because as a nonprofit race director, I have to pull a lot of things out of my hat to get people to sign up for our race, and it's every day for a whole year of looking and getting very excited when people sign up for our race, and keeping tabulations of that. It's very difficult for us to compete with the for-profit organizations. We keep our sponsors local, and we're working off of very tiny budgets. But we do a great job. We bring in people from out of state all the time. We're accountable for that, and we report on that. We bring in, I think one of our highest years was close to 20 different states. People came out to run our nonprofit race. So I think when we're talking about the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park, it's very appealing, and we never take that lightly. We're very honored to host races out there. This year we are adding a trail race. Every year we have runners that are saying, oh, is that road race? And we're like, well, kind of road. It's on a dirt road, so it's a little softer on your joints. But in the back of our minds, you know, we've wanted for so long to put on a trail race, and we've done that, and we've been very thoughtful in our process in getting it. We're at the stage now where we're there, and we're going to offer that to runners this year. We've already been thoughtful as far as like taking care of the trails ahead of time, you know, like setting the precedents, having Steve out there, picking Steve's brain, and then going back after and leaving it as is. It's very important to us. We feel very privileged to be able to host races out there. So when we do think about and consider the other races coming in the for-profit, that we do take that into consideration because we work, you know, we're always running an uphill battle as a nonprofit organization. We work with what we have, but we work very hard, and it means a lot to us to be able to host the race. So I hope that, you know, on our 12th year, we've kind of made a mark and that we can continue to grow our race in the way that, you know, is thoughtful, and it's very meaningful for StarPoint. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ms. Urbanian.
Any other comments from council? So as, if I understand correctly, you're suggesting that we put together a committee, is that correct? To look at a potential policy, to look at use, and what overuse might be,
Right.
and how to set some guideposts around what the use of our trails.
Right. With the few events that we've had so far, we kind of tailor the contract to the event. And I think we should have, instead of doing that, we should have a policy, is if you want to have an event in our parks, this is what you'll have to conform with. So, and I think I do think we should form a subcommittee or committee just to hammer those details out. And then we'll have a solid plan going forward, and anybody that uses our trail system will have to follow that guideline.
I would just add to that what Rex had mentioned at the front, which was carrying capacity, both of number of events and number
Yes.
of participants. And I would volunteer to help with that committee if the Mayor Pro Tem would be so inclined.
Is it, so let's, we do have a meeting that's going to be starting here at 6, but, so the, so given what I said, given what you said, what Rex has said here, do we have a thumbs up, you know, from committee? Yeah, so
So that my question obviously is going to be, how official do you want the committee to be? Do you want a resolution similar to what we did with the Energy Committee, or?
Yes.
Okay.
We do not want to get into any of the weeds like we did with UTV.
So that's a good point. Something more formal will, because this is another case where we want to beat the bushes if we have to, so to speak, to get parties of interest into that meeting so that we have viewpoints represented.
How many people are you thinking?
No more than 50 or so, you know.
Perfect, that'd be a lot of
Well,
I'll probably be the one working on the resolution, so just trying to get
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
parameters.
so-
What do you think, Rex? How many people do you think should be on the committee?
Well, I think we should have Steve and I, and a representative from FAR, a couple council members, 2 or 3. I don't think we need a committee any larger than that. Two, okay, 2.
And, you know, one thing that was mentioned earlier, Rex, was, you know, inviting BLM or the county or rec district. Are those committee member seats that you're interested in having on that committee, or those?
Well, with Royal Cascade, which we haven't really talked about too much, that goes through BLM property. So we probably need to have a policy for Royal Cascade kind of separately from, just because it's a different animal. It's a different type of trail, and that's something I think we need to talk about in the future. We don't need to discuss that tonight, but the Royal Cascade Trail is such an incredible trail that I feel like we really need to take further steps to protect that trail. And with its events, you know, we can talk about that during our committee meeting. It's just different.
I would suggest, as far as a number of people, that it's a little bit hard to write in a resolution, I understand, but it would depend on the nature and breadth of interested parties, letters of interest that we receive. And we may want to expand or, you know, accept a lower number, depending on the level of interest shown, and by, you know, what interest groups may be.
What would you want for your max? Because then we could put it in as a max amount.
Well,
Have some kind of parameter.
shouldn't be like the marijuana committee. That's too many.
So 10, we have 5
Oh,
right now.
gosh.
We have Rex, Steve, Barr, 2 council members, that's 5.
Maybe 5 more and see what happens. Maybe 5 more.
Yeah, let's say up to 9, so we can have an odd number.
Sure, I like odd numbers.
And Mayor, that's another committee as well, that, as you know, a committee that I'd be more than happy to volunteer to be on.
Okay. Well, we've got 2 volunteers already, and 3 people assigned. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and call this meeting to a close. We do have to be respectful of the people that follow us, and thank you for coming in and chatting with us.
Thank you.